The moon hung low over the horizon, its surface painted a deep red that cast an eerie glow across the quiet fishing village. The chill in the air settled into the bones of anyone reckless enough to wander the cobblestone streets that evening. Lanterns swung on creaking posts, their flames flickering wildly with every gust of wind that rolled off the sea. In every window, amber lights wavered, as though the villagers had huddled inside to watch the uncanny spectacle of the crimson orb looming above them. No one quite understood why the moon was that color. Astronomers might have offered a logical explanation, but in the seclusion of the village, it felt like a harbinger of something far darker. Long before the moon took on that unsettling shade, Redwood's Cove had been a peaceful sanctuary, far removed from the troubles of the world. A small community of fishermen, net menders, and boat builders, its people had lived quiet, cyclical lives, tied to the rhythm of tides. Fish thrived in the surrounding waters, providing a modest but steady income. The sea was generous, or so the older folks told it, sprinkling their stories with cautionary tales of times when the water had been less kind. Along one rugged bluff overlooking the roiling waves stood an ancient, its beacon once guided ships along the treacherous coastline, though in recent decades the coastline traffic had diminished, rendering the lighthouse more of a relic than a necessity. Rumors floated among the locals that the hermit caretaker who once lived there had vanished without a trace, leaving only cryptic symbols etched into the stone walls. Most scoffed at the notion, yet nights like this one, under a crimson moon, rattled even the most skeptical souls, dredging up dormant fears from the depths of their memories. As the red glow intensified, the sea itself seemed to stir in discomfort. Waves grew more restless, lapping hungrily at the craggy shoreline. The fishing boats tied to the wharf bobbed violently, straining against their moorings. For some fishermen, the lumbering tension hinted at a coming storm, but the sky above was clear, revealing nothing but the blood-stained moon and a smattering of cold stars. The wind carried a soft whisper that sounded uncannily like voices in prayer, or perhaps in lamentation. On that same evening, young Jonas, determined to secure a decent catch, decided to sail out against all warnings. He felt a sense of urgency he couldn't explain. Earlier in the day, his nets had come up empty, and he was behind on payments for his boat. Pride, stubbornness, and desperation drove him to ignore the uneasy hush that seemed to settle over the village. He double-checked his equipment by moonlight, ignoring the knot in his stomach, and set off into the Black Sea. With every pull of the oars, the water glowed red beneath him, shimmering like liquid copper. He tried to brush aside his anxieties by humming a half-remembered sea shanty, but his voice faltered every time a gust rattled his nerves. He had barely gone a mile from shore when he heard the first sound. It wasn't like any whale song or seal bark he'd heard in those waters. This was deeper, more resonant, as though the very ocean floor had groaned under some unimaginable weight. Jonas froze in mid-stroke, scanning the inky waves for signs of life. Panic fluttered in his chest. Then, in the moon's somber glow, he glimpsed a dark outline moving beneath the surface, far larger than his modest fishing boat. Reflexively, he reached for the lantern hanging from the prow, hoping to identify what lurked below. The light flickered, casting jagged reflections that danced like ghostly shapes. In that fractured array, a massive figure glided beneath him and vanished without a trace. Jonas's blood turned to ice. He'd known large marine life. Mostly whales or sharks could be encountered out here, but this shape was different. Too long, too sinuous. And then, as swiftly as it appeared, it was gone, swallowed by the dark water. The fisherman wanted nothing more than to row back to shore and erase the entire night from his memory, but he couldn't pry his shaking fingers away from the oars. A nameless dread held him captive, urging him to listen for that awful groan again. Somewhere in the corner of his mind, a silent voice screamed for him to flee, and at length he did, turning his boat around, pulling with desperate strokes through the crimson-tinged waves. Each splash of the oar felt like a heartbeat in his ears. When he returned to the harbor, his complexion was the color of chalk. and his words poured out in terrified gasps to the few villagers still up at that late hour. They gathered around him, their eyes wide with alarm. Most dismissed Jonas's talk as jitters triggered by the blood moon. A few, however, remembered the hushed legends whispered by grandfathers on stormy nights. Old Myra, the local herbalist, shook her head, as if recognizing a sign she had hoped never to see. She held Jonas's trembling hand and offered him a small flask of tincture. "There are things in the deep better left undisturbed," she whispered, her voice wavering like reeds in the wind. "Pray it caught only a glimpse of you." Over the next several days, the entire village buzzed with rumors, speculation, and increasing unease. Boats returned with fewer fish, their nets inexplicably torn, as though some great force in the water had shredded them. Lifelong fishermen spoke of eerie moans echoing across the waves at night. Seabirds flocked inland in disoriented patterns, squawking and crying as if shrieking their own warnings. More puzzling, the tide lines began to shift unpredictably. Water receded further than usual one afternoon, but by the next morning it was lapping at the wooden planks of the wharf, threatening to flood the entire shoreline. One evening, shortly after Jonas's sighting, a local named Greta stepped outside her cottage and found the sandy beach strewn with fish. They lay gasping and flopping under the piebald glow of yet another blood moon. Their bodies seemed battered, as though something had driven them ashore in a frenzied panic. The sickly smell of dying fish mingled with the brine, and when the villagers gathered, their reaction was a collective gasp and uneasy silence. Children were ushered away. No one wanted to voice the thought that perhaps the mysterious shape in the sea was responsible. As the moons passed, and each one rose redder than the last, the creature's manifestations grew increasingly brazen. Flickers of motion in the surf became frequent. The monstrous silhouette appeared closer to shore. Nights were punctuated by low, rumbling bellows that reverberated through every wooden beam, every battered rowboat. A primal dread permeated Redwood's Cove. In the ramshackle tavern near the docks, men drank themselves into oblivion rather than spend an evening alone with the howling wind. Women gathered at old Myra's cottage, seeking protective talismans or potions for their nightmares. Doors and windows were locked well before sundown, though no one could say whether that offered any real protection against the terror rising from the waves. Despite these growing alarms, a strange madness began weaving itself through the village. Fear twisted into fascination. Whispers circulated about the creature being a harbinger of good fortune, some ancient protector or deity awakened by the lunar event. A few zealots, led by a man named Caleb, started nightly vigils on the beach. "If we offer it worship," they speculated in hushed voices, "perhaps it will spare us." The villagers divided into camps, those who wanted to flee, those who hid behind locked doors, and those who felt compelled to embrace whatever lurked in the red moon's reflection. Jonas found himself haunted both by his initial encounter and by feverish dreams. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back on that little boat, the monstrous shadow circling beneath him. When he walked the streets, he heard voices echoing from unseen corners. Sometimes they called his name. Sometimes they muttered indecipherable words that chilled his heart. He took to sleeping in short, restless intervals, never finding true rest. Once, he woke in the middle of the night to find his bare feet caked in sand. Confused and disoriented, he realized he must have left his home in a sleepwalking daze, drawn inexplicably toward the shore. He locked the doors from the inside, but some nights he woke with the key in his hand, the faint taste of salt on his lips, as though, in the darkness, something beckoned him to return to the sea. The tides continued to shift unpredictably, and the village's foundation seemed to quake under the tension. Rumors circulated of fishermen who vanished at sea, of nighttime ceremonies on the beach that involved chanting in an ancient language. There were sightings of robed figures prowling along the cliff where the abandoned lighthouse stood. Some claimed these individuals painted arcane symbols on the rocks in seaweed and fish blood, and hoping to beckon the creature forth or keep it at bay. No one could say for sure which. Despairing of the situation, the village council, a loose group of elders who typically decided minor matters, called a gathering in the old church. A large wooden crucifix hung above the pulpit, the only part of the building that seemed solid amid the swirling confusion outside. Most villagers attended, cramming into the pews with their families, their voices subdued. The air was stale with tension and the faint tang of candle wax. Old Fletcher, who had guided Redwood's Cove through storms and lean fishing seasons, stood up front. His eyes were clouded with fear, and he leaned on his cane more heavily than usual. "I don't know what we're dealing with," he said, his voice trembling. "But whatever it is, the sea is angry, and we must find a way to cool its rage." Pocketing his pride, he requested help from the small congregation. "If any among you know something about this beast or phenomenon, please speak up." A ripple of murmurs spread through the gathered villagers. Jonas felt an uncomfortable heat rise in him. He knew they were waiting for him to revisit his story, and so he stood, reluctant but spurred on by a sense of impending doom. He recounted his fateful night on the boat, the glimpses of the massive shape, the monstrous groan, the repeated nightmares, and the following strange phenomena. One or two of Caleb's followers hissed, as if offended that Jonas spoke of the creature in such a fearsome manner. Others clutched their children tighter. At the edge of the crowd, old Myra listened, her wrinkled hands clasped around her walking stick. When Jonas finished, she stood and quietly cleared her throat. All eyes turned to her. "We must remember the old ways," she said softly. "In the oldest journals belonging to my grandmothers, there were accounts of a time the moon turned crimson, and a being from the depths rose to claim this coast for its own. People disappeared, storms raged, and the ocean gave no bounty. Only sacrifice could calm the beast." Her words chilled the air, which seemed to still in anticipation of more. Someone from the back shouted, "What kind of sacrifice?" Myra's expression was grim. "A living one, or so the old tales say." Stunned silence ensued. Redwood's Cove might have been superstitious, but they weren't savages, and yet the fear in that room was palpable, a growing mania that overshadowed reason. Several voices erupted in protest, while others muttered that perhaps it was the only way to restore normalcy. Caleb and his devout group of worshippers eyed Myra with something akin to triumph. The division in the community widened in that single instant. Some stormed out of the chapel, unwilling to listen to what they considered barbaric nonsense. Others simply stared at the floor, their thoughts a swirl of dread and uncertainty. In the nights following the meeting, Redwood's Cove fell into a collective hysteria. Doors were no longer just locked. Heavy boards were hammered across windows, and families huddled by hearth fires, refusing to speak above whispers. The men who dared sail out found next to nothing. Some never returned at all, their boats discovered adrift, stained with brine and something that resembled black blood. At the tavern, arguments escalated into brawls when the subject of sacrifice was broached. Yet, under the glow of each returning red moon, the hunger of the sea creature manifested in more violent disruptions. Several villagers reported hearing knocking at their doors at night, only to find wet footprints on the threshold in the morning. Others spoke of a booming roar echoing through the hills, a sound that made strong men tremble. Jonas sought refuge by visiting old Myra, hoping her knowledge might calm his night terrors. He found her cottage filled with a pungent aroma of herbs and oils. Dim candlelight revealed shelves crammed with yellowed books and small jars labeled with rue. She led him to a seat near the fire. "Jonas," she said, her voice weary, "the old ways speak of a ritual that can entomb the dark thing in the depths, but it requires more than just a casual offering. The blood moon must align with certain stars, the tide must be at its highest, and the cost is immense." Her eyes gleamed with sorrow. No one should be forced to make that decision. He stared at her, torn between revulsion at the idea and desperation to save his home. Thoughts whirled in his mind. memories of dark waters and moonlit nights. "There's no other way?" he asked, voice barely audible over the fire's crackle. She shook her head. "If there were, I would speak of it. The creature feeds off our fear and the blood moon's power. Those who worship it only strengthen its hold." And so a grim understanding fell upon Jonas. The knowledge haunted him as he made his way home under the oppressive moonlight. Every shadow slithering along the walls felt like a tendril of the unfathomable beast. A scraping sound made him jump, only to discover a loose shutter rattling in the wind. When he finally reached his door, Jonas found something placed upon the threshold. A small, half-rotted fish coiled in a loop of seaweed. An offering or a warning? He trembled while picking it up, tossing it far into the dark alley before barricading himself inside. The turning point came one night when the village awakened to screams. A young boy had vanished from his bed. His bedroom window lay smashed, and the curtains flapped in the night air. Claw marks, or what appeared close enough to them, were engraved on the wooden frame. The parents' frantic cries echoed as search parties scoured the surrounding hills, the shoreline, and every corner of Redwood's Cove. Torches bobbed along the sand as the villagers searched, their hearts pounding with dread. At last, they found footprints leading to the water's edge, but no boy. Only a half-buried doll that had washed up, its painted face cracked, and its eyes chipped away as though gnawed. That tragedy shattered the last semblance of restraint. Some families packed their belongings, loading carts and setting off on the coastal road by the dim morning light. Others, led by Caleb, moved to intensify their beachside ceremonies, chanting fervently to the monstrous shape as if supplicating a wrathful deity. Meanwhile, a handful resolved to enact old Myra's ancient ritual in the forlorn hope that it might restore peace. Jonas, though terrified, agreed to assist in any way he could. They convened at the lighthouse, a place as weather-worn and isolated as any in Redwood's Cove. Its winding staircase groaned under their footsteps, and the air grew chillier as they climbed. The space at the top was cramped and open to the sea's relentless gusts, which carried the reek of salt and decay. By Myra's direction, they drew symbols in ash and chalk across the lighthouse floor, forming a circle aligned with the moon's arc through the sky. Candles were placed at precise points, each representing an ancient element meant to bind to the creature's power. As the hours crept toward midnight, Jonas felt the pull of the tide in his bones. The sea below churned, illuminated by the blood moon in a blend of crimson and black. A dull roar rose from the crashing waves, and each crash sent tremors up through the lighthouse foundation. Myra's frail voice began incantations from a ragged book held together by string. A guttural language filled the air, vibrating in Jonas's chest. The lines of chalk and ash seemed to glow faintly, and the candle flames flickered in a sudden gust, threatening to extinguish with each whispered syllable. A thunderous sound, like the crash of 100 waves, resonated outside. Peering over the lighthouse rail, Jonas and the others saw it, a colossal silhouette emerging from the churning sea. The creature's skin glistened in the moonlight, its bone-like ridges protruding from a serpentine body. A gaping maw opened in a soundless roar, ringed with spines that dripped black brine. Its eyes burned like embers in the horrifying red glow, scanning the shore as if seeking something or someone. The watchers high in the lighthouse froze in primal horror, confronted at last by the full magnitude of the being that had tormented their fragile existence. Myra's voice crescendoed, her incantations growing more forceful. In response, the monstrous form unfurled massive, twisting limbs from beneath the swell. They lashed at the cliffside, pulling the beast higher. With an echoing groan, the tower itself shuddered, mortar and stone rattling as though about to crumble. Jonas clenched his teeth, steadying himself against the shaking rail, determined to hold his place in the protective circle. If they broke the ritual, their chance, slim as it was, might vanish. Below, the wind whipped the shoreline where Caleb and his followers gathered, chanting wildly in the spray. Their bonfires set the beach ablaze with dancing orange light, and their voices clashed with Myra's incantation. To Jonas's horror, it seemed as though they were calling the creature in some rival invocation, vying for its attention and mercy. The beast turned, swiveled its massive head, and roared. The sound burst across the sky, rattling every building in Redwood's Cove. Some of the robed worshippers fled in panic. Others fell to their knees, arms outstretched. Then, with a sickening force, one of the beast's limb-like protrusions struck the beach, sending debris of sand and rock into the air. A second strike followed, toppling the robed figures into the raging tide. Their screams mingled with the howling wind, swiftly drowned by the roaring ocean. Jonas's heart hammered, yet he could not tear his gaze away as the creature lunged further inland, unholy might bending the shore to its will. The chalk circle in the lighthouse flickered with a pale luminescence, as if threatened by the swirling chaos below. Myra's voice wavered. Jonas saw tears streaking her face, the reflection of the beast's monstrous presence etched into her eyes. Her incantation reached a crescendo, unearthly words whose syllables burrowed into the ears of her small band of observers. She raised a trembling hand, aiming it toward the monstrous abomination. At that instant, Jonas felt a jolt of energy race through the circle, surging from the runes, through Myra's body, then outward like a bolt of arcane lightning. The deafening crack tore through the night. The creature let out a shriek so piercing it was as though the very air split. The shock wave knocked Jonas to his knees and extinguished every candle. In the gloom, the floor beneath him felt as though it shifted. For a fleeting moment, the monstrous shape froze, locked in a grim tableau with the moonlit waves. Then the beast recoiled, releasing a roar that tapered into a guttural moan. Slowly, it sank into the dark water, one limb, then another, until its glowing eyes faded below the surface. The swirling ocean stilled, as if drained of all fury. The wind eased into a strained hush. For several suspended moments, no one spoke. All that remained was the relentless pounding of Jonas's heart. Myra collapsed, the ragged book slipping from her hands. Jonas rushed to her side, finding her alive but spent, her breath shallow and her face ashen. Together with the few who remained in the lighthouse, he guided her carefully down the winding stairs, each step echoing through the silent tower. Outside, fragments of chaos littered the beach. Splintered driftwood, torn scraps of fabric, scorched embers. Though many of Caleb's followers were gone, a few survivors crawled along the sand, dazed and frightened. The air was pungent with salt and iron. Throughout the night, the villagers who had not fled gathered in hushed clusters, uncertain if the danger was truly over. The blood moon still hung in the sky, yet its glow seemed less intense, as if diminished by the confrontation. No one dared claim victory. Instead, they waited for dawn, trembling in the knowledge that they had, at least for one night, stared into the face of a monstrous doom. When the sun finally broke over the horizon, its pale light revealed the battered shore in calm waters. In the days that followed, Redwood's Cove began a slow process of recuperation. Some families who had fled returned cautiously, drawn by loyalty to the only home they knew. The final count of the missing was heartbreakingly high. Among those gone was Caleb, as well as other devout worshippers who had hoped to tame the beast. The sea now offered a meager yield, and boats ventured out only timidly, still haunted by the memory of the colossal shape swirling beneath. Jonas often found himself standing at the shore, staring into the tranquil waves. At times, he thought he saw a flicker of movement below, or heard a faint, distant groan echo across the water. Fear lingered like a wound that refused to fully heal. Old Myra recovered slowly. Though the strain of the ritual had stolen much of her strength, she warned that the creature was only bound, not destroyed, and that the moon's cycle might one day bring it forth again. Still, the red hue faded from the lunar disk with each passing night, as if the cosmic alignment had ended. For now, Redwood's Cove was left with the scars of what it had witnessed. Doors remained bolted at night. The lighthouse stood deserted once again, and the town fell into a solemn hush each sunset. The wave-battered cliffs, the dark waters, and the broken remains of dreams served as constant reminders of the terror that had surfaced beneath the moon's crimson glow. While no one openly discussed it, each villager learned to respect the sea's secrets and to fear the magnets of ancient powers that lurked in the deep. Whether the beast truly slept in an oceanic chasm or simply waited, no one could say. The fishermen who rose before dawn still glanced warily over their shoulders, scanning for monstrous silhouettes. Mothers whispered warnings to their children about wandering too close to the water's edge. And every so often, late at night, that faint, resonant moan drifted across the waves, stirring the hearts of those listening with a chill reminder. The blood moon had revealed a hidden horror, and even though the crimson glow had waned, its legacy of dread would endure in every tide that washed the shores of Redwood's Cove.